I love dancing. I always have. I grew up with a father who actually was a break dancer, and he had like a breakdancing group in high school.
Mhm.
And so he loved to dance. And I remember growing up, he'd play 80s rap, hip hop music, and we would all just like break dance. And he taught me like how to do the worm and how to
Mhm.
do the moonwalk at a really young age. And so dancing was just always something that I was passionate about. And I actually was a dancer and was on the dance team in high school.
Okay.
And my high school dance line was very competitive. It was a school sport. I know some people are like, oh, it's not. It is.
Oh
And
no,
I played,
dance is definitely a sport.
yeah. And I was in some other sports too. And dancing for that 3-4 minute routine was way harder than like a whole 90-minute soccer game.
Yeah.
Those practices too that we had for dance line were hard. They were really tough. Our coaches really hard on us, but we were actually like the most winning team that high school ever had.
This episode of the Smart Athlete Podcast is brought to you by Solpre. If you're active at all, whether you're running or simply out walking for the day, you've probably experienced one of the number one problems that active people have, and that's chafing. Solpre's all-new, all-natural anti-chafe balm solves that problem while feeding your skin the vital nutrients it needs to be healthy. If you'd like to stop chafing once and for all and treat your body right, go to solpre.com to check out the anti-chafe balm today. That's SOLPRI.com. Welcome to the Smart Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Funk. My guest today is a little bit in my corner, founder of her own business, founder of the Mental Clutch, a sport and exercise consulting company. She has her master's in sport and exercise psychology. She's a certified mental performance consultant. She's part of the Positive Coaching Alliance, a former collegiate track and field athlete. Also, fun fact, and I'm definitely going to ask her about this, Zumba instructor and new mom. So if you hear a baby in the background, don't worry. It's being looked after. She's not neglecting the baby. Welcome to the show, Jenna Fuchs.
Yes, thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
So you were telling me before we got going, we just got to start right off the bat. Zumba instructor. So, I mean, it is still athletic related or exercise related, but
Yep.
a little out of left field from what you do for the rest of it. So where does that fit in?
Yeah, so I love dancing. I always have. I grew up with a father who actually was a break dancer, and he had like a breakdancing group in high school.
Mhm.
And so he loved to dance. And I remember growing up, he'd play 80s rap, hip hop music, and we would all just like break dance. And he taught me like how to do the worm and how to do the moonwalk at a really young age. And so dancing was just always something that I was passionate about. And I actually was a dancer and was on the dance team in high school.
Okay.
And my high school dance line was very competitive. It was a school sport. I know some people are like, oh, it's not. It is.
Oh,
And
no,
I
dance
played,
is definitely a sport.
yeah. And I was in some other sports too. And dancing for that 3-4 minute routine was way harder than like a whole 90-minute soccer game.
Yeah.
Those practices too that we had for dance line were hard. They were really tough. Our coaches really hard on us, but we were actually like the most winning team that high school ever had. You know, we had many state titles. It was like rare that they ever didn't qualify or place at state. So that's Faribault Emeralds. Shout out to them. So I was a dancer all through high school, and then in college, actually, I still missed my dancing days. So my sophomore year, I joined the LC hip hop team at UW La Crosse. And so it was kind of more of a hobby. It was kind of a club. We just practiced, and then we danced at halftime basketball games. And so I just did that on the side with track. My coach wasn't the biggest fan of me doing that in case I get injured, but he let me do it. And afterwards, I just missed dancing, and it's just something I love. And in grad school, I started doing some Zumba classes. And I was like, why don't I just get paid to dance? Because I love dancing and I love going to Zumba. And I was like, I picked up the moves really easily. And I was like, this would be really fun. And it's a great way to get free gym memberships too. And it gets me moving and you get to dance still.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great way. I was like, I think it's tough for a lot of people who did a sport in high school or into college even, that it's like, what now? How do I still, like, I spent all this time, it's wrapped up in my identity, and then there's just like this hard line, like school's over and that's it. Like there's no more football or soccer or whatever it is. How do I still incorporate that thing that I enjoy so much into my life now? So it's cool that you found, an avenue for that.
Yep. And I would agree, team sports is a lot harder. Individual sports, runner, you start, doing road races. Swimmer,
Right.
You start doing, some open water races or something.
Yeah, open water. If you can do, if there's masters meets, there's cycling, which there's very few college cycling teams comparatively to like track and field, but plenty of opportunity there. Yeah, much harder with the team sports. But that's actually something that I don't know that you necessarily specialize in, but something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and I wanted to see if you have any thoughts on it, or I could pick your brain a little bit. So I've kind of postponed my need to deal with the reality of you can't be a high performance athlete forever for a considerable amount of time post college, as I left college and transitioned triathlon and tried to earn my professional license in triathlon. And then if anybody's listening to the show, they know I was in a race, so I was doing very, very well and probably going to qualify, and then got into a crash, shattered my collarbone, and that was pretty much the end of trying to do that. I was just broken physically and mentally, more mentally than physically, really. But so I've delayed that needing to deal with the post-athlete life for 8+ years post college, and then kind of been wandering around aimlessly. I still train, still competing the last couple of years, obviously not this year. Well, the training part, not the competing part.
Yeah.
Do you have people that you've worked with that go through this transition? Have you, I assume, probably gone through the transition yourself? Do you have tips, tricks, thoughts? Like how do people deal with that?
Yeah. And I definitely think most athletes go through this. I definitely went through it, and I definitely have worked with athletes who've gone through it. And I think one of the biggest things is preparing athletes for it, because a lot of times it doesn't even get talked about. Like, I think coaches need to be talking to their teams about it. And there needs to be things set in place for college teams, and even high school teams, for if this athlete is no longer going to be in sport, if it's their senior year and they're done, like, how are you going to prepare them for that life after sport? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times they don't get prepared, and all of a sudden it happens to them, and it's like out of left field, and they don't realize how big that identity was for them until they don't have it. Mm-hmm. And then they struggle, and then it's even harder because sometimes they feel alone, because it's, and it's once they're done with their team or their sport, and then they're by themselves, they don't have their coach, they don't have practice, and they're at it by themselves, and they struggle even more. So I think preparing them for it, having that conversation, having a support team, reaching out to people and talking to people if you are having a hard time with it, because more likely, other people you competed with or on your team that also are done with that sport, they're struggling too. They're just not talking about it. Mm-hmm. So reaching out to others. And I think one thing too is finding something that still, lights that fire in you somehow. And so if you are a swimmer and you can still swim, and you want to do open water races, go for it. Sign up, still train, see how that goes, and see if that still lights that passion and fire in you. Mm-hmm. And if you're a runner, start doing road races. And that's what I did. Granted, I was a sprinter, and I did not want to start training for the 400 by myself. That's awful.
That's torturous. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to run unattached in meets. I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. But I did miss running. So I started training, and I ran a marathon, and I ran a half marathon, and I really like, 5K, 10Ks. And that's where I get that fire still lights up in me. And for dancing, like we said earlier, I became a Zumba instructor. Yeah. That's a way I can still feel, like I am getting that. And sometimes if it's not in the same sport, finding something else. Like, I know some athletes who will be in a team sport, and it's really hard for them to play that team sport because you need a team, right? Or you need certain equipment that you don't have available for you. So what else can give you that? And so like maybe you were a gymnast, and gymnastics, it takes a lot of courage, right? You're doing some scary things. And so you're pretty brave. And so to really get that feeling and light that fire, sometimes you need to do something that scares you a little bit more. And so maybe they turn to rock climbing or something where there's a little bit of a dangerous element there. And a lot of times they'll find that that fuels them and fills up their cup in that way. So you can still keep that athlete identity. I think, thinking that you need to give it up if you don't want to, you don't have to. You can find it in a different realm and still call yourself an athlete.
Yeah. There's this, I'll say quote, but I'm going to paraphrase, from an entrepreneur who has been, I lose track of time, so it has to have been 5 or 6 years ago that I listened to this podcast, but there's just this idea stuck in my head. He mentions that a lot of our stress revolves around reality looking different than our expectations of what reality actually is. And on top of that, that our identity is based on the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are. So when those two things collide, and you've been telling yourself, I'm a field hockey player and I no longer have a field hockey team, and then your reality crashes with your expectations of reality, and then you have that stress, which can come out in different ways, depression or anxiety or whatever it is. I think it becomes tough to deal with when you don't know who to talk to about it.
Yeah. And then another big thing that I work on with athletes is recreating your identity. And so like you said, if your identity is a field hockey player, so maybe it's not athlete, it's specific to field hockey, and you don't have that,
right?
You feel like you lost an identity. Well, what else are you? Or what else do you want to become? And starting to think of other identities that you have that maybe you just haven't focused on, or identities that you want to strive for. And then you don't feel so empty not having that field hockey identity.
So if somebody's came to you, I'm going to put you on the spot. If somebody came to you and they played field hockey from the time they were 3 until 22, now they're out of school and they have no other hobbies, they've never tried anything else, where do you start with them? Like, how do you get them onto a new path and building that new identity when they know nothing? Obviously, this is a little exaggerated, but
yeah,
but if they say, "Well, Jenna, I play field hockey. I don't do anything else. I have no other interests. I don't play an instrument. I don't do art. I don't do anything else. I just do field hockey. How do I find a new identity? Like, where do you get them going?"
Well, first it'd be a lot of motivational interviewing skills. Like, do they want to find a new identity yet?
Right.
Because if I'm, trying to work with them on, let's find a new identity, and they don't want to, that's not going to get us anywhere. So they need to be motivated. I'm like, I'm ready to give up this identity and start something else. And so I would probably first just see where they're at. And if they're not ready to move on yet, then maybe just talking about what they loved about field hockey, like what it did for them, what it felt like when they played, and kind of coming up with like, things that it gave them. And then that way we can start finding things that also might spark that in them as well. And so first just kind of talking about it, and maybe even reliving their like highlights and kind of just, their legacy of it. And maybe if they really don't want to give up field hockey, like how else can they still be a part of that sport if it's that sport that's so special to them? Maybe organizing pickup games with people, or, coaching. That's why a lot of people go into coaching, because they're like, I can't give up this, this identity yet. And if I can't do it, then I'm going to coach it. So maybe working on that with them, or, if they're like, yep, I'm done with field hockey, then like I said, starting to come up with what other things can you do that still gives you that spark and that lights that passion in you. Yeah. And it might take some trial and error. They might, need to go do some different activities that maybe they never even thought of, and then reflect on how did you feel when you did it. Yeah.
I think, you clearly have more professional experience in guiding people in this aspect, but I've had this kind of conversation with people before, and it seems like it's tough. on a personal level, there's so many things that interest me. I simply don't have enough time to do all of them.
Same here. So my husband always tells me I have too many slices in my pie.
Yeah. So I'm like, yeah, I want to learn metal engraving. Yep. I want to get back to like making jewelry. And yep, I'm still playing the violin. And like, there's too many things.
Mm-hmm.
So like finding passions or hobbies has never been a problem for me. And sometimes I feel like that gets in my way of trying to guide people who have a tough time that don't necessarily feel that initial spark with, I'll say anything. Obviously, I'm being a little obtuse, but like it just seems like there's not as easy of a spark that starts with, hey, maybe I would be interested in doing that thing. I think I fall back on, what is the phrase? A hobby is a pursued interest over time or something like that, where it's like, well, maybe you only have a mild interest in it, but if you continue looking into it over time, you find that it develops into a passion because you've learned more about it and you know about it and you become involved.
Yeah. That's that is very true. Sometimes a hobby, might just be a hobby, and then the more you do it, it becomes passion. And sometimes there might be things that you don't even know you're going to be super passionate about until you give it a try.
Right. That's where I feel like the tough part is, because for people like us, we're like, I have an endless list of things I'm interested in, but then and then we're obviously one side of the coin. Then the opposite side of the coin is like, how do you guide those people to find a new identity when they don't even know where to start? Do you have any better ideas than I just say, you just need to try some things. Just say yes to things for a while.
Yeah. And sometimes too, you have other identities, you don't need to create a new one. Mm-hmm. So just because you're not a field hockey player anymore, whatever that one was, like just sitting down saying like, who else are you? What other identities do you have? Maybe you are a brother, right? And that's really important to you. And so now you have this time to build that relationship with your brother or do things with him. And you can strengthen your other identities too, because maybe some of those that are really important to you, they kind of, were on the sidelines while you were so focused on that athlete identity. Mm-hmm. And then now you can bring those other identities that are already there. So you don't have to go seek out a new one, seek out a new passion. They're already there, but you can strengthen those instead.
That's fair. I got off on my own issue with asking you about this. And I did want to back up a little bit and give you a little bit of a hard time. This comes from a place of love because I one of my undergrad majors was psychology, so this is kind of a reflective question.
Okay.
But why did you get into psychology or sports psychology in particular? I'm sure you've heard people talk about, everybody that's in psychology had some sort of trauma or issue themselves, and they're always trying to fix their own problems. I find sometimes that's true, not always. So I'm always curious as a psychology major, I'm always curious what people are thinking. So how did you get into the field? What was your kind of journey?
Yeah, so mine actually started in high school, and I really don't know why I was drawn to psychology. Before I even took a class, I was just like, psychology sounds really interesting to me. And I knew nothing about it, but I don't know if the word sounded interesting to me, just like the name of, I don't know what it was. Mm-hmm. So junior year in high school, I took a psychology course and I really liked it. And from there I decided, well, my senior year, there was AP Psych. And I said, I'm going to take AP Psychology. And if I still like it and still find it super interesting, and if I do well, so if I take the AP exam and I pass it, I kind of this is how I told myself. I said, if all those things happen, then I'm interested and I'm good at it, I'm going to go to school and major, right? Like for college, that's going to be my major. That's what I'm going to pursue. So I already told myself this. Mm-hmm. And I signed up for AP Psych and I still loved it even more. And it was my favorite classes my senior year. And I actually didn't even really study for the AP exam, which was really dumb on my part. But it was my way. I think in high school, it was I wanted to see how good I could be without trying really hard, which now is just not, a good path to
Right.
go down. If you want to do something well, you should work at it. But I was kind of stubborn. I'm like, I just want to see if I'm naturally good at this. And I did end up passing that AP exam and got the AP credit. And I, then decided I was going to UW lacrosse, and I liked their psychology program, and I knew this is what I wanted to go to school for. And I was one of those odd ones that actually went to school with a degree in mind and stuck with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think nowadays that doesn't really happen, nor
Not
should
as often.
always. Yeah, because you don't know if you're going to like that topic or not. And I just continued to love psychology with all the courses I took in my undergrad, and knew I wanted to go to grad school to pursue my degree even further in psychology. And I just didn't know what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
So it was about my junior year, I was thinking of programs and thinking clinical or counseling or school psych, like something like that. And never even heard of sports psych, and loved sports. Like athletics was always a huge part of me. And I was kind of sad in a way of like, well, if I go clinical or counseling, like how am I still going to have sports alive in my life? And figured I'll just like coach my kids' sports. And then I was actually watching the Summer Olympics going into my senior year, and they were interviewing, it was track and field, and they were interviewing one of the winners, and I wish I knew who it was. But they were interviewing them, and they asked them, what did you do to prepare for this event or this race? And they said they worked a lot with their sports psychologist. And I was just like, what the heck is a sports psychologist? Like, are you kidding me? Like, this is a thing. And I just researched it myself and stumbled across sports psychology and spoke to my professors, and they didn't know anything about it, which wasn't very helpful. But then it was like the stars aligned for me, because going into my senior year, we got an email with the psych department that we got new faculty who actually had a sports psychology background. And so shout out to Dr. Q at UW lacrosse. He was a lifesaver. I did not take any of his courses because he was teaching all just like, the intro to psych classes, and I didn't need any of those, but I met with him many times in his office, and he told me everything about sports psychology, about the programs. He helped me kind of find my passion and like what I kind of wanted to focus on and what programs he thought would fit me. And then I decided, this is what I'm gonna do, sports psychology, and decided to go to Minnesota State Mankato and got my master's there.
The thing that like always boggles my mind a little bit is that there's so many coaches, and it's becoming a little more prevalent now, so it's not as bad, but there's so many coaches and people in general that want to make sports out just to be like a purely physical endeavor, where it's like, I was just talking about kind of something similar with my last guest. We were talking about rate of perceived exertion as a good measure for stress over time, where that's obviously a very like subjective measure. It's all about how I feel. It's not you can make it into a number, but it's not quantifiable in terms of like I can run this fast or I can punch this hard or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But it just makes me a little nutty sometimes that coaches want to ignore the entire brain part and like what's going on inside your head, because that's what's running, like that's the engine, it's running the machine. If like it's not in the right place, you're not going to get the entirety out of the machine.
Yep.
So I'm glad it's becoming more of a forefront, but it seems like it's taken way too much extra effort to get there because of how important it is. Yeah.
And it is really awesome. They are taking steps forward, and yes, wish it was sooner, but it definitely is being talked about more and more. And the NCAA, just passed for that mental health initiative, that all D1 programs need to have someone on staff in their athletic department, for the mental health awareness piece. And I think that's amazing for athletes to have. So we're headed in the right direction.
Right. Well, it coming from a running background, maybe that's the thing, is because I've always had coaches preach running is 90% mental and 10% physical. Yeah. Obviously, it's a little over exaggeration, but it gets the point across.
That's very important.
That like, hey, you got to get your head in the right place. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it's even if with them preaching that, there was no there was no like coaching mental strategies. Hey, how are you feeling today? What, are you dealing with any anxieties? What's going on at home? And maybe at least in high school, maybe it's a matter of there's professional issues there. I don't know. I'm not a high school teacher, so I don't know if that becomes a gray area where like you can't, there's certain professional lines you can't cross. I don't know. But there was no, coaching strategies to that effect, even though it was pointed out, hey, this is a very important thing. It was just kind of like, hey, it's important. Hope you figure it out.
Yep. And I really think for all coaches, even if you are worried about, like ethically, like what you can and can't do.
Right.
I think you're doing a disservice though for all your athletes if you're not at least checking in and asking them how they're doing.
Right.
Like you're not going to get in trouble for asking them how they're doing. Or what are you thinking about? What's going on inside your head? You're not going to get in any trouble for that. Once you start thinking you're a counselor, then yes. But it's okay for them to let you know what's going on. And then I think it's really important for all coaches to know, like, if you have athletes who are really struggling, like, who is the counselor at the school? Where's the counseling department on campus? And have those resources so that you are following the ethical guidelines of like, okay, yeah, this is out of my scope, but I know what to do now. Like I know who to call, I know who to refer them to, so that you are helping your athletes.
Yeah. Yeah. So it a little bit begs the question, since as you mentioned, now there are more positions kind of opening up. How did you end up starting your own thing versus like kind of attaching to an already made program?
Yeah. Well, it started pretty much the last semester of my grad program at Minnesota State Mankato, where we're all, headed towards graduation, finishing up our capstones, and everyone's talking about like, what are we going to do next? And then there's me, and I really didn't know what I was going to do. And I knew I loved working with teams and coaches and athletes on the mental side. And I loved that piece. And I really liked being in the field, just working with them in workshops and individual sessions. And I know I didn't want to go back to school right away. The research side definitely is needed, not needed by me because I'm not best at that. But like put me in the field, hands-on, like just out there roughing it with them, and like put me on the sidelines during a game or anything like that. Like that's what I wanted to do, be at practice and all that hands-on instead of more the research side. And so I was thinking about what could I do? And my now husband, then boyfriend at the time, he was living in Wisconsin, in his hometown, a small town called Prairie du Sac, Wisconsin. And I was in Minnesota, and he actually owns his own company. He owns an automotive shop, and I knew like he was staying there. And he actually just bought a house, and the plan was once I graduated, I was moving there. So I'm moving to a small town, Wisconsin, and sports psychology is not really well known. And so I was like, well, how do I do this? Like, how do I do what I want to do, what I'm passionate about in this area? Mm-hmm. So that's where I was really torn, because there were job opportunities out there for me and I could apply to them, but I would have to move and I'd have to do distance. And I didn't know if I wanted to do that. And so I was really torn. And that's when I thought like, well, I could just go, the route of starting my own consulting company, and then I can just market myself and I can do what I love. And my mentor, Cinder Kampoff, was amazing. She was definitely an advocate for me to go that route and helped immensely because I did not know the business side. So when I was thinking about this, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, what am I going to name it? How do I get an LLC? How do I build like all that stuff? I was like, I don't know how to do any of this. And Cinder really was like, you'll figure it out. If you have any questions, call me, because she opened her own consulting company in Mankato, Minnesota. And it was really small at the time too for sports psych. She's like, it's a chance to grow the field. And so when I looked at it at that lens instead, it didn't seem so scary. And with her help and all my cohort, they were really helpful. I remember going to class like, okay, I'm going to start thinking of some business names. We're like shooting around, names until I came up with the mental clutch. And so it was pretty much until I graduated. And I remember when I came up with the mental clutch, I like Googled it to see if it was, available, and I found the domain and it was available, and I bought it in like March, and I graduated in May 2017. Mm-hmm. So I was like, I'm doing this. Like I'm committed to doing this. And then I spent this summer at IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida as a leadership and character development coach to just really build up my skills, working with teams and athletes, so that when I did come back then at the end of summer in Wisconsin, I really felt like I was at a place where I could market myself and knew more of my worth of like, yeah, like I can ask for, getting paid for my services now. I'm not, a graduate student anymore. Now I'm a professional, and that really built up my confidence to go for it.
Yeah. What's interesting is that I guess in my own little sphere or perspective, it seems like a lot of people will go consulting after they just spent 5-10 years or longer in whatever field, doesn't matter. And then they're like, I'm burnt out at doing this. Now I'm going to do consulting versus you're just like right out of the gate. Like, this is how it's going to make it happen, which I admire and relate to because, you had a situation where it's like, well, my husband lives here and this is something I want to do. And it wasn't simply a matter of, well, there's no opportunity for me here. So now I need to go wait tables or insert any other non-related job. It was, how do I make all of it happen? And I feel like that's a mentality that's lacking in so many people. Like that it's like they see a barrier instead of an opportunity.
Yeah. And I mean, it sometimes it did see it as a barrier. It did have, I did have to kind of change that mindset.
Right.
At first I was like, well, I can't do sports psychology in this small town, and then it took like, people be like, well, grow it. And I did have to change my mindset, but it was a huge shift once I did that and then could see it as an opportunity and, like, hey, no one knows about this. Now I can teach them about it. And then too of like, hey, no one has worked with the sport, performance consultant before. Like, great. If I'm really bad, they don't even know. Like, when I first started with like, what if I don't do very well? I'm like, they're not even going to, who are they going to compare me to?
Right. There's
seeing
no
all the
like,
opportunities.
That's the perfect way to approach it. Where it's like, well, if this goes horrible, nobody else is going to know, and it'll be perfectly fine.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, I don't know anyone at that town yet. Like,
no, I love that. That's great. It's just, it's. I mean, it's all in the mentality, right? And that's kind of, that's what you do. It's like, why not? Instead of seeing the I can't, it's how can I?
Yeah, and that's huge in sports too, and even outside of sports, just in life, because we always think, what if it doesn't go the way I want it to? Or what if I fail? And we always look at the negatives and the bad what ifs.
Right.
And if we can change it and just ask ourselves, but what if it goes well? Or what if it does happen the way I want it to? Or what if we do meet our goals? And then thinking of that instead of all the negative what ifs, it really fuels us in a different way, in a better way.
You have more hands-on experience with all these athletes trying to, coach them. I'll say coach, but I'm not sure if that's the exact right terminology. But it seems like the downsides that we imagine in our minds often seem much larger than they actually are.
Yes, they are.
Yeah. It's like, we think about like you said, like, if it goes horrible, like, what's the downside? Okay. I learned a lesson. Maybe I get better. Maybe I'm embarrassed for a little bit, but like, is that bad? Versus the upside, it's like, well, now you get everything you wanted. You get to not make an ultimatum to your husband where you're like, I'm moving, and you're either coming with me and losing the business, or like that situation doesn't have to happen. You get to follow your passion. Like you get all of it. And then the downside is maybe I'm embarrassed if it goes wrong.
Exactly. And then it doesn't seem as bad. And it always doesn't seem as big of a deal to an outsider. So obviously when it's your situation, it's huge. Yeah. But to someone else, they're like, well, if the business doesn't go very well, then, you apply for a job somewhere else. Or, or you just stop doing that business and start something else. But to you, you're like, no. And I remember where it was. I don't know if it was a podcast or who it was, but they always, they were saying that they always ask the question like, but did you die?
Mm-hmm.
When something seems like really scary or really bad, or like, or I failed or I messed up so bad, but did you die? No. Okay. Was it that bad then? Like, when you compare it to that, okay, it's not that bad. Like sometimes you just need someone on your side to just ask you those questions when your mind is so thinking the negatives. And so as a mental coach, that's a lot of times what I just do is just ask those questions, but what if I fail? Then I just ask them, what if you succeed? And just ask them to think about that.
Right.
And the more you do that, then they can start asking themselves those more effective questions.
That's what I was going to ask you, is whether you basically are the effective outside voice of objection, where they're stuck on, what if it goes wrong? What if it goes wrong? And then you get to sidetrack that mental track and be like, yeah, but what if it goes right? And slowly break down that pattern. Is that what you do most of the time?
Yeah. So it obviously depends on the client and, their situation and what they're struggling with. And a lot of times it is their self-talk, and it's, the story they're telling themselves. And a lot of times it is very negative. And so I am trying to get them to see it a different way and change that self-talk to make it more effective for them. And so it's helpful. And there are some athletes, it helps them to think of the negatives because they can prepare for it. And so it's different, instead of thinking negatively or positively, I think of it more of like thinking effectively, or non-effectively. So if it's helping you, great. If it's not helping you, let's change it. And a lot of times if it is a scary situation for them, or they're thinking of the negative what ifs, I go with that instead of just always trying to reframe it and change it to like, let's think of the other side. Sometimes I'll go with it and be like, okay, let's say you do fail. What does that mean? And a lot of times they don't even know what failing means. They're like, well, I don't want to fail, like, okay, well, what is failing in your sport? Well, I guess losing. Okay. So, if you don't lose, then you didn't fail. Yeah. Okay. All right. So then we talk about like, why is losing considered failing for you? And, focusing maybe more on the effort, like, well, what if you, played the best game of your life and you still lost? You failed in your mind. And then they're like, wait, that doesn't really make sense. Then just kind of getting them to think through that. Yeah. And then working through the what if scenarios. And so if they're perfect example, track and field athlete, if they're worried about false starting, I might have them like, okay, let's do some imagery, and you false started. What does that look like? And then they don't think it's as scary if they've actually gone through in their mind and they see themselves overcome that negative what if scenario. Then it's not negging them constantly.
Yeah. That's a great one to think about. It happened every once in a while, but as a distance athlete, it is not generally a concern to false start.
Yeah, it's a little different for sprinters.
Right. I was like, with a sprinter, like you've got to getting off the line, especially when we're talking about the 100. I mean, that's
you got the blocks.
The whole race can be right there. Versus, well, if we're doing the 5,000 and I started a half second behind everybody else, it's probably going to be fine. So I don't have to worry about getting up the line. That's a great one. See, now I just lost my train of thought. Where are we going? Negative self-talk. I don't know. It doesn't matter. I saw you posting about so school sports starting again. I saw you post, I think it was or commenting about an article about the parent-coach relationship and trying to frame that in a new way. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so it was actually an article from Positive Coaching Alliance, and they're a great resource. So I do recommend all parents to kind of check that out, and even coaches, especially if you're coaching youth athletes, they have amazing resources. And they just released an article saying, how, especially with COVID, but I mean, even without COVID, it's really important to have that, relationship built there. And they're looking at, as a parent, like what you can do to help build that relationship with your child and the coach. And they kind of break it down into certain steps that you can do. And just really kind of keeping out those lines of open communication, knowing your role as the parent, how you can support your child without overstepping with the coach, and just really trying to be there and be that supporter that your child needs.
Because correct me if I'm wrong, you're focusing more on, I'll say, youth athletes or younger athletes. Is this something that you deal with?
What do you mean?
So I'll say like the negative side of like an overbearing parent or something in sports. Is that a mentality you run into that you've got to kind of navigate with the athlete or potentially with the parent? I'm not sure how broad the scope of your consulting goes.
Yeah. So, if I'm understanding correctly, like, have I worked with an athlete where there's like an overbearing parent?
Right.
Yes, I have. Yes, I think if you work with youth athletes in any capacity, you have dealt with an overbearing parent. I think, what do they call them now? Lawnmower parents instead of helicopter parents.
Okay, not just, I hadn't heard that term, but
yeah, so they're not helicopter parents anymore. They're not just over the kid, but now they're lawnmower parents. So they are literally mowing over any obstacle or issue that's in the child's way and making that path clear for them. So yes, I have dealt with many lawnmower parents.
I like that. I'll have to tell my dad about that. He likes mowing the lawn, so then it'll be. He was never that way. He was very adamant about me being successful, but they very much stood. My parents kind of gave that gift to me and stood back and just, you like do your thing, whatever it is you're gonna do. Just
you can overcome it yourself.
Yeah, just go and like just do it, like because I had enough drive myself. Like I didn't need to be driven, so maybe that's part of it too.
But they could have helped instill that in you too.
Oh well, no, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
So
yeah, no, my father's an incredibly hard worker, and that kind of runs in the family. Is like always very competitive in sports, just very driven people. And then I also had my martial arts instructor, I've briefly spoken about on another episode, I can't remember with who, from Russia, Russian, very like driven, gonna like make sure you get it done kind of guy. So having those influences definitely kind of shaped me at a young age. Yeah.
Awesome.
I do want to ask you about something that I talk about with a lot of guests, and I just talked about with my last guest prior to you, Dr. Max. We were talking about injuries, and I think you deal a little bit with post-injury mentality, and I think I'd seen, I'll call it a meme or a quote, something about, you're still an athlete even if you've been injured.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about that? I've been injured a ton of times. So what should I be doing if I get injured to try to stay in the game?
Yeah. So that quote was actually from a book, Rebound. I think do I have it right over here? No, I think it's downstairs. I am currently trying to finish it up, but so it's a really great book, Rebound by Carrie Cheadle. And so it talks all about how to rebound from an injury within your sport. And great read. If any injured athletes out there want to pick it up, highly recommend it. And it really gives a lot of tangible tools and like skills and things you can go through yourself and that are going to help you bounce back. And so I think one of the biggest things is if you are injured, knowing that, I don't know, it depends on your injury, right, but you can come back from it. And obviously there's certain situations where maybe you can't, and maybe coming back is going to look very different. But I think having that mindset of this, I'm injured right now, but this isn't where I need to stay. And, like you're still an athlete. You didn't lose that identity. You just need to, your sport now is your recovery and your rehab, and you have to work just as hard in that as you did before you were injured.
Is that, I guess I'm curious, like, what does your day-to-day look like? Are you dealing more with those kind of things, or is it really just a grab bag of, whatever team I'm working with, we're going to deal with this? I guess I'm just curious about your, because it is such a new field and I don't have any personal experience with it. Whether it's like these are the 5 things that I always have to coach through, or if it's just I really have to take everybody individual by individual.
Like what I do with my clients?
Right.
Yeah. So I really try to meet them where they're at. So it is very individual. So if I work with a team and I, get reached out by a coach or an athletic director, whatever that is, I always, try to meet with the coach and ask them a series of questions, trying to get them to for me to get to understand them and their team. And I want to know their goals. I want to know their strengths. I want to know their weaknesses. I want to know the coaching philosophy. I want to know what they want to get out of these sessions as well. Because I'm doing a disservice if I try to say, every team's the same, every athlete's the same, and this is what I bring to the table, and I'm going to do it the same for everyone. I could do that, but it wouldn't be very effective.
Right.
And so I want to know a lot about the team. I may even try to go to a practice or a game and watch them. I really like doing that as well, because you might hear certain things from a coach, but if you watch it, you can see things that maybe a coach is even picking up on, depending on the coach's background within sports psych. And then I can really tailor the workshops to what I feel like the team needs. And so then I'll go from that end. And if I'm working with an individual, I really just try to get to know them. So the first session I always say is an intake, and I just ask them questions. I feel kind of like what we're doing. I get to know them. I want to know their background. I want to know who they are as an athlete. I want to know who they are outside of being an athlete, their struggles, their strengths as well, and what they want to get out of the sessions. And then I tailor our individual sessions around their needs. And so sometimes they're injured athletes. Sometimes they're just, dealing with a lot of negative self-talk and self-doubts, or maybe they're, gearing up for a big meet or big competition. They just want to enhance their confidence a little bit more going into it and their focus. And with teams, it could be building team culture. It could be getting ready for a big game themselves. And then, the coach just wants the upper edge. It could be communication, whatever they need. But I do say I specialize in teaching the clutch mentality. Mm-hmm. And so if there is a team, or if I'm doing workshops with a bunch of different sports where it's hard to tailor it specific to them, I do have a program. It's either 1 hour session where I condense them all, or I can break it down into 6 sessions, and I call it the clutch mentality. And so the clutch is an acronym. And so each letter is a different mental skill that I touch base on, and kind of say that if you build the clutch mentality, it's what I call like the eye of the storm mentality. So it's teaching you to be the calm in the chaos of the storm that's around you in your sport or your performance, and how you can get there.
Okay. So that maybe answers my next question or thought, in that I was thinking, because it has to be so individual to, hey, where is this person or this team at? Yeah. How do we address their particular issues or scenario rather than issues? I was wondering, is there an ideal mentality, which maybe that is exactly what you were talking about?
Yeah, the eye of the storm.
Right.
So I did start it as the eye of the storm mentality, but then when I created like the acronym clutch for the 6 mental skills, then I call it the clutch mentality. But essentially it is having that eye of the storm mentality, being that calm in the storm. And if you can do that, ultimately you're going to be able to have more clutch performances.
Right. Yourself. So obviously the acronym is going to make it more succinct, but is there, I'll call it an elevator pitch, but that's my own jargon. Is there an elevator pitch for what that looks like?
What the clutch mentality is?
Right.
So I talk about it as you're in a storm, right? And what's the eye of the storm? And that's the calmness. And so when you're in a high stake performance or game, there's the chaos that's going on around you, right? You have the team, you have the fans, whatever it is, you have the pressure. But how can you stay calm in that chaos and create your own eye of the storm? And that's what I teach with the clutch mentality.
Okay. It's a really interesting field. Also, I'll have to keep in touch with you to see how things develop over time. I'm glad people like you are out there doing it, because it is so important. Like I said, it's just, we have the whole, as a culture, finally kind of addressing mental health on the grand scale a little bit more, not appropriately, but giving it its appropriate weight a little more, maybe is what I'm after. Instead of ignoring it or, just saying, oh, that person's crazy, it's like, no, there's something going on. But then, within that, dealing with these kind of, I'll say, normal behaviors that we go through in sports and in performance, and trying to, I'll frame it as help ourselves grow to be stronger individuals, to deal with our own, mental talk or mental game. So I appreciate that you're out there doing that.
Yeah, thanks. And I appreciate that you have the podcast and you're, also spreading the word, and that you invited me to be on the podcast today too.
Yeah. So you did watch a couple of my episodes. So you may know, as we are winding down time here, I'm asking everybody the same question this year. So I'm asking everybody what you think the purpose of sport is.
I think the purpose of sport is honestly to learn life lessons. I think that's really what it comes down to. And you can do it. You can learn life lessons, not being in sports. So I don't think you have to be in sports to do it, but I think sport is an amazing vehicle and able to do that.
Very succinct answer. And I think a great one as well. Jenna, if people want to keep up with you, get in touch with you, maybe have you help them with their game, where can they find you? Where can they get in touch?
Yeah. So my company is The Mental Clutch, and I have my website. So www.thementalclutch.org. You can find me there. You can shoot me an email as well at mentalclutch@thementalclutch.org. Very redundant, but that's the one I got, and I didn't know how to change it, so I'm sticking with it.
That's okay.
Otherwise, you can follow me on social media. I have kind of stopped for a little bit on social media since I just had my son 7 weeks ago, but I am starting to get back into it, so I should be more active on that. And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and it's all The Mental Clutch. And I also have LinkedIn as well. I'm not as active on LinkedIn. I'm trying to do that, but it's just hard to do it all. So LinkedIn is definitely
You can't do it all there. Okay.
Yeah.
For you listening, don't give Jenna a hard time. If you're on LinkedIn, just find her somewhere else. Like she'll take care of you, I promise.
Yeah, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter I'm the most active on for social media.
Yeah, good deal. Jenna, thanks for hanging out with me today.
Yes, thank you.